Margaret Thompson had worked at the Veterans Affairs Medical Center for 23 years, and most days she felt completely invisible. She arrived each morning at 6:30, an hour before her shift officially began, to prepare the lobby and reception area. Her uniform was always pressed, her silver hair neatly pinned back and her name tag positioned perfectly straight. Yet patients walked past her desk without acknowledgement. Doctors barely nodded in her direction, and even her supervisor seemed to forget her name half the time. The other staff members had their cliques and lunch groups, but Margaret always ate alone in the small break room, reading paperback novels she borrowed from the library. She had applied for promotion 3 times in the past 5 years, each time watching as younger, less experienced colleagues received the positions she had hoped for. Her personnel file was spotless, her attendance record perfect, but somehow she remained stuck behind the same reception desk year after year. Margaret lived alone in a modest apartment across town, having never married. Her parents had passed away years ago and she had no siblings. The Veterans Affairs Center had become her entire world, yet she felt like a ghost haunting its halls. Patients complained to her about wait times, billing issues, and scheduling conflicts, but rarely thanked her when she resolved their problems. She had memorized the names and service records of hundreds of veterans, remembering details about their families and medical needs, but few of them seemed to notice her dedication. On this particular Tuesday morning in November, Margaret noticed the unusual activity around the medical center. Security guards were posted at entrances she had never seen monitored before, and maintenance staff were polishing floors and cleaning windows with extra care. When she asked her supervisor about the commotion, she received only a vague response about an important visit. Margaret shrugged and continued her routine, assuming it was another bureaucratic inspection that would have no impact on her daily work. As the morning progressed, she observed staff members whispering in small groups and checking their appearances more carefully than usual. The head of administration walked through the lobby twice, something that happened perhaps once a month under normal circumstances. Even the usually chaotic emergency department seemed unusually organized and quiet. Margaret continued answering phones, directing visitors and processing paperwork, wondering what kind of inspection could cause such a dramatic change in atmosphere. Just before lunch, a black sedan with government plates pulled up to the main entrance. Margaret watched through the large windows as several men in dark suits emerged, followed by a tall figure in military dress uniform. She could not see his face clearly from her position behind the reception desk, but the way the other officials deferred to him suggested he held significant authority. Margaret returned her attention to her computer screen, assuming this was just another political photo opportunity that would disrupt normal operations for a few hours. What Margaret did not know was that her quiet acts of service over the past 2 decades had not gone completely unnoticed. 3 months earlier, a veteran named Robert Chen had written a letter to his congressman about the exceptional care he received at the medical center. In his letter, he specifically mentioned the receptionist, who had helped him navigate the complex system when he first sought treatment for PTSD. Robert described how this woman had stayed late to ensure his paperwork was processed correctly, had personally walked him to his first appointment when he seemed confused and overwhelmed, and had checked on his progress during subsequent visits. The letter eventually made its way through various government channels and reached the desk of General Patricia Morrison, a 4-star general who oversaw veteran services in the region. General Morrison had served 3 tours in Afghanistan and understood the challenges veterans faced when returning home. She was particularly interested in identifying and recognizing civilian employees who went above and beyond in serving former military personnel. Robert Chen's letter sparked her curiosity about this dedicated receptionist, who seemed to embody the spirit of service that the Veterans Affairs system was meant to represent. General Morrison had spent 2 weeks quietly investigating Margaret Thompson's service record and speaking with veterans who had interacted with her. What she discovered was remarkable. Over the past 5 years alone, Margaret had been mentioned by name in over 40 positive feedback letters from veterans and their families. Many described her as the person who had made their experience at the medical center bearable during difficult times. Veterans wrote about how she remembered their children's names, asked about their recovery progress, and somehow always knew exactly which doctor or specialist they needed to see. One letter that particularly moved the general came from Maria Santos, whose husband had been killed in Iraq. Maria described how Margaret had helped her navigate the complex process of applying for widow's benefits, spending her own lunch breaks to make phone calls on Maria's behalf. When Maria's young son had behavioral problems at school, Margaret had quietly provided information about counseling services and even offered to watch him during appointments when no other childcare was available. Maria's letter ended with the statement that Margaret Thompson was a true hero who served veterans' families with the same dedication as any soldier. The general also discovered that Margaret had never taken a sick day in over 3 years, had donated her vacation time to help cover shifts during staff shortages, and had personally paid for office supplies when budget cuts affected basic operations. She had started a small lending library of self-help books and recovery resources, purchasing materials with her own money and maintaining it without any official recognition or support. Margaret had also learned basic Spanish to better communicate with Latino veterans and their families, studying during her breaks and evenings. Perhaps most impressive was Margaret's unofficial role as an advocate for veterans who struggled with the system. When paperwork was lost or delayed, Margaret would make discreet inquiries to ensure files were processed quickly. She had developed relationships with staff members in various departments, allowing her to expedite appointments and resolve billing issues that might otherwise take weeks to address. Several veterans credited Margaret with preventing them from giving up on treatment, entirely during moments of frustration with bureaucratic delays. General Morrison realized that Margaret Thompson represented exactly the kind of dedicated service member that the military hoped to find in civilian support roles. Her selfless commitment to veterans' welfare, combined with her deep knowledge of the system and genuine care for each individual, made her an invaluable asset to the medical center. Yet according to her personnel file, Margaret had received only standard annual evaluations and no special recognition for her exceptional performance. The general decided that Margaret's service deserved formal acknowledgement, not just from the medical center administration, but from the highest levels of military leadership. She arranged for a surprise visit to personally present Margaret with the Civilian Service Achievement Medal, one of the highest honors that could be awarded to non-military personnel who support veterans. The medal was rarely given to employees at Margaret's level, typically reserved for senior administrators or medical professionals who made significant contributions to veteran care. General Morrison also planned to recommend Margaret for an immediate promotion and salary increase, along with a formal letter of commendation that would be placed in her permanent personnel file. She wanted to ensure that Margaret's contributions would be recognized by future supervisors and that her dedication would be rewarded with tangible career advancement. The general understood that recognition without practical benefits was often meaningless, especially for employees who had been overlooked for so many years. As the black sedan approached the medical center that Tuesday morning, General Morrison reviewed her notes about Margaret Thompson one final time. She had read every letter from grateful veterans, studied Margaret's personnel file in detail, and spoken with several staff members who worked closely with her. The general was convinced that this surprise recognition ceremony would not only honor Margaret's service, but also send a powerful message to other employees about the value of genuine dedication to veteran welfare. The medical center's administration had been informed about the visit only that morning, creating the atmosphere of nervous energy that Margaret had observed. The administrators were both excited and anxious about having such a high-ranking military official visit their facility, especially for a purpose they had not initiated themselves. Some worried that the surprise recognition might reflect poorly on their own leadership, since they had failed to properly acknowledge Margaret's contributions over the years. Margaret was processing appointment requests when she noticed the commotion in the lobby had intensified. Security personnel were positioned near the main entrance, and she could see several administrators gathered in the hallway, speaking in hushed tones and checking their watches repeatedly. The head of Human Resources, Mrs. Davidson, emerged from the elevator looking unusually flustered and walked directly toward Margaret's reception desk. Mrs. Davidson had barely spoken to Margaret in the past year, usually communicating through memos or brief email messages. Margaret assumed she was about to be asked to handle some administrative task related to the mysterious visit, perhaps printing additional forms or directing the important guests to a conference room. She straightened her posture and prepared to be helpful, as always, despite feeling slightly nervous about the unusual attention. "Margaret, I need you to come with me for a moment," Mrs. Davidson said, her voice carrying an odd mixture of excitement and anxiety. "There are some people who would like to meet you." Margaret felt confused but obediently saved her work and followed Mrs. Davidson toward the main lobby. She assumed she was being asked to provide information about a veteran's case or explain some administrative procedure to the visiting officials. As they approached the lobby, Margaret could see a small group of people in formal attire standing near the main entrance. Among them was a tall woman in military uniform, whose bearing and demeanor immediately commanded attention. Margaret had seen high-ranking officers during her years at the medical center, but something about this woman's presence seemed different. The way others positioned themselves around her suggested she held significant authority. Mrs. Davidson guided Margaret to a position about 10 feet from the group and then stepped back slightly. Margaret felt increasingly bewildered as conversations around the lobby gradually ceased and attention focused in her direction. She wondered if there had been some mistake, if perhaps they were looking for a different employee with a similar name. The idea that she might be the focus of this gathering seemed impossible. General Morrison turned toward Margaret and began walking in her direction. Margaret's first instinct was to step aside, assuming the general intended to speak with Mrs. Davidson or another administrator standing nearby. But the general's eyes remained fixed on Margaret as she approached, and Margaret realized with growing astonishment that she was indeed the intended recipient of whatever was about to happen. "Ms. Thompson," General Morrison said, her voice carrying the authority of her rank but also a warmth that surprised Margaret. "I am General Patricia Morrison. I have come here today specifically to meet with you." Margaret felt her heart racing as she struggled to understand why a 4-star general would travel to their small medical center to speak with a reception clerk. The general continued, speaking as a small crowd of staff members and veterans gathered at a respectful distance to observe the proceedings. "Ms. Thompson, over the past several months, my office has received numerous letters from veterans and their families describing the exceptional care and support you have provided during their treatment here. Your dedication to serving those who served our country has come to my personal attention." Margaret felt overwhelmed by the general's words and the growing audience around them. She had never sought recognition for her work and felt uncomfortable being the center of attention in such a formal setting. She opened her mouth to protest that she had simply been doing her job, but General Morrison raised her hand gently to indicate she was not finished speaking. "The letters we received describe acts of service that go far beyond the normal requirements of your position," the general continued. "Veterans have written about how you helped them navigate complex systems, provided emotional support during difficult times, and advocated on their behalf when they encountered obstacles. Your commitment to their welfare embodies the highest standards of civilian service to our veteran community." Margaret glanced around the lobby and noticed that several veterans she recognized from daily interactions were among those watching the proceedings. She saw Robert Chen, whose complicated case she had helped resolve months earlier, standing near the information desk with what appeared to be tears in his eyes. Maria Santos was there as well, holding her young son's hand and smiling broadly in Margaret's direction. The reality of the situation began to sink in as General Morrison gestured to an aide who approached carrying a formal presentation case. Margaret realized that this ceremony was not a mistake or confusion about identity. After 23 years of feeling invisible and overlooked, someone had not only noticed her work, but had deemed it worthy of recognition from the highest levels of military leadership. General Morrison opened the presentation case and removed a gleaming medal attached to a ribbon in military colors. Margaret had seen similar awards in photographs but had never imagined she might receive such recognition herself. The general held the medal at eye level so that Margaret and the gathered audience could see it clearly. "Ms. Thompson, it is my honor to present you with the Civilian Service Achievement Medal, in recognition of your outstanding dedication to veteran welfare and your exemplary service to the Department of Veterans Affairs," General Morrison announced in a voice that carried throughout the lobby. "This award represents the gratitude of the United States military and the veterans you have served so faithfully." As the general stepped forward to place the medal around Margaret's neck, something unprecedented happened. General Morrison, a woman who commanded thousands of soldiers and reported directly to the highest levels of government, raised her hand in a formal military salute directed at Margaret Thompson. The gesture sent a visible shock through the assembled crowd. as military personnel and veterans recognized the profound respect being shown to the quiet receptionist. Margaret felt tears welling up in her eyes as the weight of the moment overwhelmed her. For more than 2 decades, she had arrived each morning wondering if her work truly mattered, if anyone noticed her efforts to help veterans navigate the complex medical system. The sight of this distinguished general saluting her service felt like validation of every extra hour she had worked, every phone call she had made on a veteran's behalf, every small kindness she had offered during someone's moment of need. The salute seemed to last an eternity, though it was probably only a few seconds. During that time, Margaret became aware that several veterans in the lobby had also raised their hands in salute, creating a tableau of military respect that she had never dreamed she might receive. Robert Chen's salute was particularly moving, as Margaret remembered the day he first arrived at the center, confused and overwhelmed by his PTSD symptoms, barely able to complete the intake paperwork. When General Morrison lowered her hand, the lobby erupted in applause from staff members and veterans who had witnessed the ceremony. Margaret noticed that even administrators who had barely acknowledged her presence over the years were clapping enthusiastically. The head of the medical center, Dr. Reynolds, approached with an expression of surprise and what appeared to be genuine admiration. "Ms. Thompson," Dr. Reynolds said, "I had no idea that your work had received such recognition at the national level. The medical center is honored to have an employee whose service has been acknowledged by the highest military leadership." Margaret could hear in his voice a newfound respect that had been absent in their previous brief interactions. General Morrison then addressed the larger group that had gathered to witness the ceremony. "Let me share with everyone present some of the specific examples of Ms. Thompson's exceptional service that led to this recognition," she said. "Veterans have written to describe how she helped them during medical emergencies, supported their families during difficult treatments, and ensured that no one fell through the cracks of the system." The general went on to describe several specific cases, including Maria Santos's experience navigating widows' benefits and Robert Chen's successful treatment for PTSD. With each example, Margaret felt both proud and embarrassed by the public attention. She had always believed that helping others was simply the right thing to do, not something that deserved special recognition or formal ceremonies. "Ms. Thompson represents the very best of civilian service to our veteran community," General Morrison continued. "Her dedication, compassion, and expertise have made a real difference in the lives of those who sacrificed for our country. She embodies the spirit of service that we hope to find in every employee who works with veterans." After the formal presentation, General Morrison spent several minutes speaking privately with Margaret about her experiences at the medical center. The general asked about the challenges she faced in her work, and listened carefully as Margaret described the satisfaction she found in helping veterans overcome bureaucratic obstacles. Their conversation revealed the depth of Margaret's knowledge about veteran services and her genuine commitment to improving the lives of those she served. The general then informed Margaret that she would be receiving an immediate promotion to patient advocate specialist, a position that would allow her to use her knowledge and dedication more effectively while receiving appropriate compensation for her expertise. The new role would involve working directly with veterans who faced complex medical or administrative challenges, essentially formalizing the advocacy work Margaret had been doing informally for years. Word of Margaret's recognition spread quickly throughout the medical center and into the broader veteran community. Local news outlets picked up the story after a veteran who witnessed the ceremony contacted a reporter friend. Within days, Margaret found herself receiving phone calls from journalists, wanting to interview her about her work and the unusual honor she had received from General Morrison. The attention felt overwhelming to someone who had spent decades working behind the scenes, but Margaret discovered that the publicity brought positive changes to the medical center. Donations began arriving from community members who had read about her dedication to veterans. A local business owner sent a check to support the lending library Margaret had created, allowing her to expand the collection of recovery resources and self-help materials. More importantly, the recognition seemed to inspire other employees at the medical center to examine their own commitment to veteran services. Margaret noticed that staff members began spending more time with patients, showing greater patience with complicated cases, and looking for ways to go beyond their basic job requirements. The culture of the entire facility appeared to shift toward a more service-oriented approach. Margaret's new position as patient advocate specialist allowed her to work more directly with veterans facing complex challenges. She was given an office near the main lobby, maintaining her visibility to patients while having space to conduct private consultations about sensitive issues. The promotion came with a substantial salary increase in benefits that Margaret had never expected to receive. Her first major case in the new role involved helping a young female veteran who had been struggling to receive appropriate treatment for military sexual trauma. The veteran, Sarah Mitchell, had been bounced between different departments and providers without receiving the specialized care she needed. Margaret used her knowledge of the system and her relationships with various staff members to ensure Sarah was connected with the right resources quickly and discreetly. Sarah's successful treatment became a model for how the medical center could better serve veterans with complex trauma histories. Margaret developed protocols for identifying and addressing similar cases, training other staff members to recognize signs that patients might need additional support beyond standard medical care. Her expertise in navigating the system proved invaluable in creating more efficient processes for everyone. The lending library that Margaret had maintained informally for years was officially recognized and expanded into a full resource center. The medical center administration allocated space and funding for materials addressing various aspects of veteran recovery, from PTSD management to career transition support. Margaret was given responsibility for maintaining and developing the resource center as part of her new duties. General Morrison visited the medical center, again 6 months later, to see how Margaret's promotion was progressing and to review the improvements that had been implemented based on her advocacy work. During the second visit, the general met with several veterans who had benefited from Margaret's expanded role and heard directly about the positive changes in the facility's culture and services. Ms. Thompson has become exactly what we hoped when we recognized her dedication, General Morrison told the medical center's leadership team during her follow-up visit. She is proof that outstanding service can be found at every level of an organization, and that recognizing and supporting dedicated employees benefits everyone in the veteran community. The general also announced that Margaret's success story would be featured in a Department of Veterans Affairs newsletter distributed nationally, highlighting her as an example of how civilian employees could make significant contributions to veteran welfare. The newsletter article would include quotes from veterans whose lives had been improved by Margaret's advocacy and describe the positive changes at the medical center. Following her promotion, Margaret found that her new role allowed her to identify systemic problems and work with administrators to develop solutions. She created a mentorship program that paired experienced veterans with those newly entering the system, helping to reduce confusion and anxiety among first-time patients. She also established regular feedback sessions where veterans could share their experiences and suggest improvements to services. The transformation in Margaret's career and the recognition of her contributions had ripple effects throughout the veteran community. Other medical centers began requesting information about Margaret's advocacy methods and resource development strategies. She was invited to speak at conferences about civilian service excellence and best practices in veteran support. 2 years after General Morrison's surprise visit, Margaret Thompson had become a regional leader in veteran advocacy and support services. Her transformation from an overlooked receptionist to a recognized expert in veteran affairs demonstrated how proper recognition and support could unlock tremendous potential in dedicated employees. The medical center where she worked had become a model facility, attracting visits from administrators and policymakers who wanted to understand their successful approach to veteran services. Margaret's resource center had expanded beyond lending library services to include support groups, educational workshops, and peer counseling programs. She had obtained certification as a veteran services counselor and regularly attended training sessions to stay current with policy changes and best practices in veteran care. The shy, invisible woman who had once eaten lunch alone had become a confident advocate who spoke at national conferences and testified before congressional committees about improving veteran services. The mentorship program Margaret developed had been adopted by dozens of medical centers across the country. Veterans who had been helped by the program often returned to serve as mentors themselves, creating a sustainable network of peer support that reduced wait times for appointments and improved treatment outcomes. The success of the program caught the attention of Department of Veterans Affairs leadership, who asked Margaret to help design similar initiatives for national implementation. General Morrison remained in contact with Margaret and had become something of a mentor herself, providing guidance as Margaret navigated her expanded responsibilities and growing reputation in veteran advocacy circles. The general often cited Margaret's story as an example of how military leadership should look for excellence at every level of operations and ensure that dedicated service members received appropriate recognition and advancement opportunities. Margaret's personal life had also transformed significantly. The confidence she gained through professional recognition had encouraged her to become more socially active in her community. She joined a book club at her local library, volunteered with an organization that supported military families, and developed meaningful friendships with colleagues who had come to appreciate her expertise and dedication. The loneliness that had characterized her earlier years had been replaced by a sense of purpose and connection. The Civilian Service Achievement medal that General Morrison had presented to her was displayed prominently in Margaret's office, but it was accompanied by dozens of thank you letters from veterans and their families. Margaret considered these personal messages to be equally valuable recognition of her work, as they represented the real impact she had made on individual lives and families during difficult times. Robert Chen, whose letter had initially brought Margaret to General Morrison's attention, had successfully completed treatment for his PTSD and returned to college to study social work. He credited Margaret's support during his early treatment as a crucial factor in his recovery, and had chosen his career path partly to follow her example of service to the veteran community. Robert often visited the medical center to update Margaret on his progress and to volunteer with the mentorship program. Maria Santos had also thrived with Margaret's support, successfully completing her education and obtaining a position with a veteran service organization in another state. Before moving, Maria brought her son to visit Margaret one final time, explaining to the boy that Margaret was the person who had helped their family during the most difficult period of their lives. The child presented Margaret with a drawing he had made showing her receiving the medal from General Morrison. Margaret's story had been featured in numerous publications and had inspired similar recognition programs at other veteran facilities. The Department of Veterans Affairs had created an annual award named in honor of Margaret's contributions, recognizing civilian employees who demonstrated exceptional dedication to veteran welfare. General Morrison served on the selection committee for the award, ensuring that other deserving employees would receive the recognition and career advancement that had transformed Margaret's life. Looking back on her journey from invisible receptionist to nationally recognized advocate, Margaret often reflected on the power of recognition to unlock human potential. She understood that her dedication had always existed, but the validation and support she received had given her the confidence and resources to expand her impact exponentially. Margaret's story became a powerful reminder that excellence could be found in unexpected places and that organizations benefited tremendously when they identified and nurtured their most dedicated employees. The medical center where Margaret worked had seen dramatic improvements in patient satisfaction, employee morale, and treatment outcomes since her promotion and the cultural changes that followed. The facility had received several awards for excellence in veteran care, achievements that administrators acknowledged were largely due to Margaret's influence in the program she had developed. Her transformation from overlooked employee to institutional leader demonstrated how recognition and proper support could create positive change throughout an entire organization.